the digital aspect of water.
Gigi, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, hi everyone, Gigi Karmous-Edwards. I'm with Karmous-Edwards Consulting. I've been consulting with water utilities and water technology companies for quite a few years now on digital. And of recent, I joined with Amir and Swan organization to help start the Digital Twin the Swan Digital Twin Working Group, where we really focus on bringing people together globally on the challenges of digital twin, which a lot of it is data, as you guys have mentioned, and then also find the best practices that all utilities can start to look at so that we can increase the adoption of digital twin technology in water utilities around the world.
Are you seeing any trends on digital twin adoption? I mean, it's one of those buzzwords that are getting created in our industry, and you're seeing various levels of types of digital twins across different types of applications, whether it's OpEx, CapEx, process, treatment, distribution. So I'm curious to understand from your perspective, given your wide purview on consulting and project, I'd love to hear what you're seeing on digital twins.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely seeing a trend towards more interest in digital twin. Generally, I think, Amir, if you remember the very first workshop we had, which was not last May, but the May before last, we had about 60 people register for a digital twin workshop, about 75 people attended. And the last virtual workshop, we had about 405 people register. So this is just in the water sector. There's a huge increase in the interest. Now, I do have to say that I'm finding still the United States is lagging behind other countries. Britain and the UK, they've really taken on a huge, kind of like what is it called? The Great Britain Digital something. And they're really focused on digital twin in all sectors, including water. So I'm seeing the Europeans pretty much take a lead in that. I'm working with some Middle Eastern countries, and I'm seeing them take a big leap forward in digital twin concepts, as well as Australia and some of the Asian countries. I'd like to see more happening in the United States, to be honest with you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gigi. Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about North America versus Australia versus Europe. We're seeing the same thing. In fact, especially in Australia, the way that the organizations there, the decision makers, and the cities are embracing technology, it is far more collaborative approach and really led from the executive level. And really simple concepts like the city of Brisbane, one of the things they said was, hey, any technology we're going to adopt is going to be software as a service, so SaaS first. We're getting out of the game of data centers. We've been there in the past. We run data centers. We know other organizations can run data centers better than we can, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft or whomever. But that's a key trend that we're also seeing municipalities really from a ITC perspective take that SaaS first approach. Pretty interesting. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing on other countries.
Yes, not so much from the government, but I'm seeing more and more utilities globally are working more with cloud. And I think that is really the game changer in digital twin concepts, because you need that elastic type of compute service in order to run some of the simulations that are very crucial for a digital twin. So yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the SaaS model is the game changer.
Can I just say, can I interject here? It's Ed Brady. My camera's not working. I just got a new one because of this big interview coming up. But I have designed and implemented and installed so many different data collections systems, if you will, monitoring
Right.
stuff. But the problem is cybersecurity all the time, whether I'm working with, you know, top secret projects or municipalities, everybody's hacking through air gaps and water meters and things. So what are you guys hearing about that? I mean, it just seems like everything gets put on hold because of that, you know?
Great question. Maybe I'll open it up to the group.
Yeah.
Rick, any perspective, anything you're hearing from your perspective on cybersecurity and its roadblocks or challenges, or how other organizations are addressing it?
I think there's definitely a justifiable concern out there, but again, it's very different from place to place. So if you're going to the UK example, you know, there are European cybersecurity protocols that the major utilities are imposing on all of their vendors. Very rigorous. I mean, to the point that you've got to have a board member who's overseeing it. You've got to have annual audits. There's a whole almost ISO process around this. So they're approaching it in actually the appropriate way. Here in the US, it's a bit like the Wild West, but it's all Wild West, right?
Yeah.
We've got hundreds of installations. I mean, we do real-time monitoring of contaminants of concern. We've been doing it for 10 years. And multiple analyzers in the same utility. And, you know, they're streaming our data to the cloud. The fact is that there's a degree of paranoia about this because, you know, is it read-only data? Because if it's read-only data, there is no way back into the utility through the cloud, right? Some of this is just built out of simple ignorance. Cybersecurity suddenly becomes a catch-all for not doing anything. There are extremes and appropriateness. I mean, to the broader point, I think COVID has brought out the need for this sort of data, remote monitoring. Don't need to have people grabbing samples, running to labs, waiting 2 weeks. And that's changing the operational environment. People are understanding the value of data, which they didn't really understand before. And there are multiple facets of it, not just canary in the mine, process optimization. There are multiple applications of this. What it brings to utilities. So I think that's changing, and it's changing the regulatory environment. So I was on a call with State Water Resources Control Board California yesterday, and they are going to impose with the new hexavalent chrome regulation that every system has continuous monitoring, and they want to see the data. Not to, I mean, it won't be regulatory data to start with, but it's going to be regulatory data. So instead of being compliant once every 90 days and gaming the system, which so many utilities around the world do, it'll be you're allowed excursions now and then. So one excursion per quarter, no longer than 3 days, otherwise you shut the system down. And so, you know, this is going to change you know, the whole context of this industry, which has flown by its pants in terms of regulatory compliance.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. I'm just worried. I mean, I listened to a great audio book about, you know, how we had, well, there's a lot of stuff that we don't know about. I have a clearance, but we had Stuxnet out there, and we spun the centrifuges in Iran and blew them up, right? And that was supposed to be an impenetrable system. And so I'm worried about our water as being the source for some destruction, you know? And the electric grid's the same way, and I work on that. So it's just, I just wanted to hear your anybody's point of view on it, you know?
I always like having Rick involved because he'll tell it like it is.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I don't work a lot with cybersecurity, I suppose, but we are seeing a lot we work a lot with startups, and a lot of the issues we cover with them are trying to prepare, as Rick says, with the regulations that are coming. So even from a very early stage, as they're forming, they have to start with their cybersecurity in place, because otherwise they run into issues, you know, later if they do want to get a contract with the government or with the utility or what have you. So definitely seeing it very prominently.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Tamara. Edward, the other comment I'll make is there's definitely an increasing need, as Rick had mentioned, for organizations wanting you to have certifications, whether it's ISO, whether it's FedRAMP certification. You have to have these certifications in order to, you know, be even considered. You know, my biggest concern is that it is a potentially a hindrance to smaller companies that are innovating because they're just not capitalized enough to put in an ISO certification or to invest, $500,000 on FedRAMP.
Agreed.
It's just not going to happen, right?
So we needed this whole, it was a wad of documentation, literally that thick, with every employee signed up to the policy and whatever. But we paid someone, I think 10 grand. They did all the documentation for us. And there is a business out there of writing protocols that, you can probably download the whole lot from Google now already. But the real issue isn't did you do the paperwork, it's are you actually applying it, which yes, it's a barrier for small, but actually if you approach it systematically, it's not the end of the world. You just got to do it properly.
I agree, Rick. And the interesting thing about cybersecurity, and Edward, you mentioned a couple things like people sniffing around packets and everything. A lot of the hacking actually isn't through the web. It's through, hackers looking at garbage and finding passwords and the network access or sneaking into your office and all those kinds of, I don't know if you all remember that movie Sneakers with Dan Aykroyd and whatnot, but
but something, they're into industrial controls now, though. That's the problem, and they're jumping air gaps.
Yeah.
I know this just because of my clearance. The industrial controls are scary. Like I said, spinning reactors or centrifuges in Iran when they were, developing nuclear stuff. Imagine what they could do with different valves and things in water processing. Yeah, that's all. I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but
Stuxnet, though.
Amir, you're seeing it all from your vantage point. What did you?
Well, I was just going to say Stuxnet was the Mossad, so I wouldn't worry about the Mossad hacking into your water bills. What were you going to say, Rick?
Yeah, I got you.
Your position sort of in the industry, what you were seeing, because you've probably got a better view than us in the trenches. You're coming from the other end of the perspective.
Yeah, I think I misspoke. I don't think it was Stuxnet. It was the Olympic Games is what it was called, was another one, but whatever. I maybe it's because I've been working with the military there. Everything I put in, they won't hook up,
Yeah, I'd like to hear what Amir's got to share with us. That'd be really helpful.
Sure. So it's interesting, actually. We were talking about SaaS as the game changer. I would argue that it's not SaaS, it's DaaS. And the difference between SaaS and DaaS is that DaaS is a vendor's actually producing the data themselves. And you're not just taking it from like the existing data that's there from a SCADA system. So there are suppliers now that are using this model. And I think within like 5 years, DaaS is going to be as synonymous as SaaS. It's just like a lot of people don't like jargon and like words like that, but you can think of it like a subscription model or an outsourcing model. I don't know if Aquatic Informatics is also involved in that, or AMS for that matter.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I'd say to people, you don't really want our box, whether it's pink, black, or brown. What you want is the data out of it, right? The challenge for data as a service, though, because it's an easy bit of jargon, is that you've got to back it with a service level agreement. It's a bit like the original cell phone contracts. If the data's not there, then what are they paying for, right? So then the question is the data reliable and is it available?
Can you elaborate on that? Because DaaS for me means distributed antenna systems.
Yeah, really data as a service. Really good discussion. I'm glad you brought this up, Amir. And this is what's interesting because it goes back to what Gigi had said when she kicked us off, is that a lot of the innovation is happening in countries where they don't have the big upfront capital investment to put all the sensors in and put all the telemetry in. And they're relying on technology companies to do that, but to build a pricing model where it is about data as a service. So that's what we're seeing, from our perspective.
So
in developing
I can
countries.
maybe define it. It's a business model where a utility outsources the operation and maintenance of a certain hardware, whether it's a water quality sensor, level sensor, customer meter, and they only pay for the final outcome that they want, whether it's the data itself summary report or predictive analytics. They can even pay by the data point. So it's a model which shifts the risk to the solution provider. And it's just a different way of paying for a service. So they, in the data as a service model, there's no CapEx costs. It's just put into the contract that the vendor is going to be responsible for the infrastructure. A lot of times what's complicated for utilities is the transmission side of things, the communication side, in terms of interoperability, data integration. So that's all the responsibility of the vendor. And I've been interviewing different utilities and vendors. This is like part of a PhD I'm doing. And you hear a lot of utilities saying that they prefer this model because they want to focus on their core competency. And it's not, you know, where does this antenna go? What kind of concentrator do I need? It's, you know, how can I deliver water to this person?
It's kind of like, oh, sorry, please.
No, sorry.
I'm just trying to understand because it's kind of new to me, the DaaS versus SaaS, but DaaS is kind of like a smaller chunk, so it may be more manageable. It's kind of scoped down what they're trying to do.
It's DaaS is, sorry, Gigi.
I was going to say, I've been hearing a lot about that, like for metering companies, for example, instead of selling the hardware to the utility, they almost, it's like they're renting the hardware to the utility, collecting the data, doing some of the analytics for the utility, and then providing the output or the insights to the utility, rather than the utility saying, oh my gosh, I gotta now purchase all of these meters. I have to figure out, like Amir was saying, how am I going to communicate all that information? You know, do I use cell technology or do I use, you know, radio technology? And then how do I harness that data and how do I analyze it? All that was put on top of the utility company that might not have the expertise to do all of that. And now this becomes more of a service, and it's a win-win for both the vendors and the utilities. However, I still think there's going to be some major challenges, because one of the biggest challenges today that I'm seeing with all utilities is data normalization. Not, you know, data integration is great only if you've normalized it. And one of the biggest issues that we're finding with digital twin is that, you know, if you have a SCADA system and you have a GIS system and you have a CMMS system, all of these systems have data about a particular asset, like a pump or a valve or anything like that. And the identification of, you know, a pump in this location could be one thing in the SCADA system and something completely different in the GIS system, but they're the exact same pump. And in order to integrate that data together, you really need the ability to translate that this pump in the SCADA system is the same pump that's in the GIS system. And that requires humans. And today, you cannot do that through software or any other type of system. And I think that's the biggest challenge. But if we start with, you know, I'm hoping that we can do more digital twin concepts in the design phase, move into the construction phase, and then into the operational phase. You have that consistency of data from the get-go, which we don't have today. But anyway, that's one thing that I still see as a challenge, even with data as a service versus, you know, what we were talking about. Like why I feel still the game changer is a software as a service, because the computational power of the cloud computing is really what's needed to run those simulations. But I
totally agreed. And Gigi, even if you take a step back, because I love what you just explained there, even when you're dealing with traditional sensors like a level sensor in the natural environment, and you know, let's say you have 100 level sensors out there monitoring a river. The normalization of data also has to do with just cleaning the data. We know level sensors go off, you know, a bird could go on it. It can get dirty, get pulled out of the water, whatever. The data becomes useless if you can't correct that data. What if there's a shift in terms of in terms of just, you know, the phase shifting, and you need to go reconfigure or calibrate that machine. So all those things around the cost to go up into, you know, a 20-hour drive just to recalibrate machine this is where the power of technology can help, as you say, normalize that data down from a really simple level sensor all the way to pH, temperature, O2. The power of the correction of that data is critical, because then, you know, you can actually use it to feed models, whether it's predictive or AI based or data science models. So 100% agree with that. And thank you for bringing that up. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, you then have to explain who is going to go out and fix that sensor, and which vendor is going to sign up to a data service contract where they are committing to delivering clean data.
Yeah.
Which is now, you know, they're now responsible for delivery of the data. And I defy you to name a vendor of any of this hardware that it is today equipped to deliver, well, let's call it a service level agreement, which is that you're going to have data 24/7 by 365, et cetera, with it calibrated and. Because the vendors, it's a very nice model, but the vendors aren't equipped for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can give you a few examples if you want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
No, I mean, it's a model that, like, there's a company that their model is that all you're gonna get when you sign up for the system is a username and a password, and they're gonna take care of everything else. And what's interesting is that through Swan, I've seen a lot of companies, especially startups, prefer this model because it's good for startups. You need to be agile to do it. And you need to have like multi-parameter sensors, things like that. So we've actually started through Swan a community of practice where we have vendors and interested utilities sharing their best practices. So like James and Rhett, I can like invite you guys to one of these calls. But it's interesting because they're sharing their like secret sauce, like very similar to the digital twin. It's an emerging business model. So people are trying to understand, you know, what are the challenges, what are the barriers, and how can we, you know, overcome those? And maybe like, what's a good way to promote it? For example, one company doesn't use the term data as a service because it implies that maybe that they're selling their data, which is not the case. So they call it like infrastructure as a service. But yeah, I don't think you're right in a sense that I don't think a company can guarantee that they'll have like data uptake like 24/7, but maybe there's certain agreements that they can guarantee in terms of percentage, you know, correct or something like that. But what's most interesting for me is that you would think that this model makes a lot of sense for like a developing country that doesn't have the manpower to do it themselves, but some of the most advanced utilities in the world prefer this model because it's performance-based. So if a vendor is not meeting their end of the bargain, they can, you know, hold their feet to the fire and say, okay, you're not meeting the contract, I'll just find another vendor that can.
You guys talk about cleaning data though. Isn't real time sort of the way, what is needed, you know?
Yes, near real.
Near real.
I use the term near real time, but yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's pretty exciting. Really, it really is. Even just, you know, having been exposed to working with organizations like the USGS as an example. I mean, they have a lot of data, and it needs to be continuously corrected, cleaned, graded before it enters the wild or enters the usage within the models that they want to use. So super important and extremely critical.
Yeah, and following what Amir just said, I mean, there is a company here in the Raleigh area, in Raleigh, North Carolina, and they are not a distributor of meters, but they will purchase the meters, and they would install the meters, they will handle the data, they will do everything. So I agree, there's a lot of companies, and there's, you know, this great business model for companies that are not producing the hardware to get into that business. But like you said, there's going to be some stringent type of you know, service agreement that they're going to have to follow through with. But that isn't a growing market. I agree.
I have to ask if anybody is aware of any like kind of knowledge sharing going on between different industries, because I feel like this is not just in the water industry. It's got to have been done I worked in oil and gas before, so I know that they had the same sort of issues with data and, you know, an excess of data that was sitting there, not normalized, not clean, not being used. So is anybody kind of talking and learning from each other, sharing those best practices?
Go ahead.
No, people are weird. It depends on, because I'm an energy engineer and that's all I ever did. Well, I've been doing water for 20 years, but it hasn't taken off until now. But it depends, though. I think people should be more collaborative, but they're not. Not always.
I can tell you, you know, with the Swan Digital Twin group, we have one group that's looking at BIM and asset management. And that was, I think that's the latest group that we just started, subgroup that we just started. And one of the things we're trying to do there is really look at how the building and architecture industry started looking at their assets and standardizing the attributes of those assets. And if we could learn from an industry that's a little bit ahead of us, they're not completely ahead of us, but they're a little bit ahead of us, and then bring that into the BIM for, you know, because Swan has now collaborated with BIM for water. And so we're now hoping to adopt, you know, from this other industry, how they handle assets and metadata of assets, but also make it machine readable, which now means the data integration part will be extremely simplified compared to what we're dealing with today across these, you know, utilities. And if you think about it, assets is really at the core of any of these analytics that we're talking about. So, so I don't know. I feel like that's very exciting, and there's a lot of collaboration there. I'm very.
We have to affect policy, though, and that's huge. I mean, I do in California, but they built on a desert. They screwed up. It's not my problem. But you know, the answer is not to do desal in San Diego and line up and then flood the ocean with you know, high salinity content, because that kills all the upwelling. And see, there's a lot of defeating things, even in the solar. Do you know how much carbon is exuded just in making solar panels? So are we really going carbon neutral? There's just so many, you know, discrepancies. Sorry, keep talking here.
Right.
My point was, I think people work in silos and push their agenda, but when you look into it, maybe we do need to collaborate more, right?
I agree. I mean, some of the best thought leadership comes from the intersection of industries that are trying to solve the same problems at the end of the day, whether it's, you know, industrial, oil and gas, food and bev. I mean, you know, and versus municipalities and, you know, or you know, state and fed or you know, developing countries. I think it's the intersection of thought leadership. You know, I was at Singapore International Water Week 2.5 years ago. And one of the speakers said, the answer to our water challenges are already here. It's more about being able to communicate them across multiple countries is the challenge. It's language is the challenge and education is the challenge, not the technology. We have the technology. Right. It's about sharing that info. So I agree with you, Ed. Your point is spot on.
But you bring up a great point, though. We export all the shit, excuse me, to the other countries. So, oh yeah, well, yes, we're fine here, but we're polluting, you know?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's enough out of me. All right.
Rick, you're going to make a comment?
I can't remember what it was. Sorry. Yeah, no, it was about the cooperation. I think the thing you were saying there, Amir, about yeah, a much closer link between the vendors and utilities is critical, because traditionally it's been very much a vendor-buyer relationship. You know, without that cooperative development of solutions, as opposed to, you know, I've got a box, it's better than the next guy's buying my box, as opposed to this is where my industry is going. I mean, that's the going back to, I think it was Gigi's point about the UK. You know, they have a 5-year, 7-year investment program, which is to address a whole range of strategic initiatives for the industry, and they are bringing in vendors to help design solutions looking not just for today, but 7 years down the road. That's a very different model than has traditionally played out in the utility sector in most parts of the world.
Rick, in the United States, okay, I've drilled a lot of pilot wells on the military bases, and honestly, we are a war-driven, society, whether you know it or not. And half of our problems is because we poke the bear. But all I find is no clean water. I mean, Florida, where I am now, yeah, that's fine. But everywhere I drill, there's PFOS, or there's flowers on trees that are actually radioactive in Tennessee. Like, our military has really ruined. So we're kind of fighting, we're battling against somebody who's not participating in the same goals. And I know that's harsh and political, but it's true. I didn't know if you experienced that outside of the US.
Hadn't even experienced it here, I'm afraid. So I take it as a data point. I'm not sure how it changes what.
Yeah, I know. Well, it is what it is, right?
Yeah, the other aspect of this, so we've talked about a number of different trends, right? Industry, cross-market collaboration. I think, honestly, one of the biggest underrepresented and largest opportunities is education, and education of that next generation, because let's face it, the water industry, a large cohort of leaders and operators and scientists and practitioners are retiring.
Mm-hmm.
And, thinking about the sustainability, and I like to compare it to other industries. Think about fashion, the fashion industry, textiles and clothing. The amount of pollution that industry has created, and the awareness that the public has brought to what's happening is changing consumer behavior. So you're starting to see sustainable fashion brands coming out. You're starting to see, local companies upcycling, fabrics and using dead stock fabrics, and it's changing. The consumers are changing, and now it's becoming cool to utilize and buy and support sustainable fashion and support local, as opposed to buying from a mall who we know at the end of the day they're polluting Bangladesh and other developing nations. So I believe the biggest opportunity that we all could help is that education and getting involved with universities and that next generation. We see pockets of that happening across the world, but definitely interested in your perspective and whether or not you all agree.
I'm going to jump in 100% agree, James. I think that's one of the things we work to do a lot is connect kind of with, we call it the triple helix. It's industry and government, but also academia. In some countries, they also add a fourth dimension, which is the public. And I think that's the most important. I got very excited this morning. I heard on NPR, John Kerry was talking about climate initiatives that may come. And not getting political here, I just was excited to hear it was being discussed the way it was. He was saying how the market cares, and it's companies who can see the trend going that way, that you have to address sustainability. And there is a younger generation, especially that's willing to say, we won't buy from you if you're polluting in Bangladesh. So
yeah, it's so interesting, Tamara, even just in our recruitment, at Aquatic Informatics, when you all are interviewing the next generation of talent, one of the number one questions we get asked is, tell me how you're living your purpose as an organization. Right? Give me an example of how you're actually living the purpose. It's unacceptable to that generation that it's purely about profit. It's really interesting, and it's changing fast.
Thank God.
One thing I was wanting to do from a water perspective in terms of education, how all of us now really understand the carbon footprint. And, companies talk about their carbon footprint and people ask about it. I think we should have something very similar with the water footprint. And it should be just as, it should be just as well known of a quantity as the way we now start to think about the carbon footprint. And this might be something, I don't know, I feel like Swan can make a big difference here.
But that's a good idea because some of the progressive Southern California municipalities like Irvine Ranch Water District, they hired me to write almost like an ASHRAE level 3 for energy, but I translated it into water and did water balance and spent a couple of years, and then Molten Nagel bought it. But that's what they do because they have that allocation. And if the company starts exceeding that, they know the footprint, right, based on industrial.
Yeah.
But they're all on top of it, you know, with purple pipe and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But it's not everywhere. It's pockets, like you're saying, right?
Yeah. And how do we make that like a more commonly discussed, parameter that everyone just, they have to say, oh, I just ate a hamburger and it was, so many liters of water or so many gallons of water, just start to bring the awareness of the water footprint in everything that we do and see and eat and, play around with.
Who was talking about California earlier? Maybe I was somewhere else in another group, but unless, the water doesn't come out of your faucet, the big pain, or unless you're hit with triple time like demand charges, which they may go to, nobody's going to do anything from a consumer standpoint in their comfortable little homes. When I lived there, the water moratorium was on. People were out watering their lawns anyway, especially Beverly Hills, right? So I don't know where you hit them.
I think it brings us back to the data thing and data as information, because if you just tell someone, it takes 5,700 gallons of water to do this, it doesn't mean anything to them. You have to make it kind of tangible. Like it takes a football field worth of, there's all these analogies. I think that's part of it, making it tangible to someone.
I agree.
Human nature.
What got missed out in it is the consumer, actually. So when we talk about this data, it's all very comfortable between the vendors and the utilities, right? But the one piece that's missing from here, and Gigi makes the point about how much water goes into your hamburger, but what about the water, the quality of the water coming out of your tap? Because if I want to eat a yogurt this morning, I'm going to work out whether I want it high in this or low in that. I know what I'm eating. I make an informed decision. Whereas I have to make a trusted guess from the water coming out of my utility that it's actually safe to drink. And a lot of people know from experience it's not. So when we talk about sort of democratization of data, where does the consumer fit in this picture? Because they're the clients at the end of the day, not us and the utility, right?
I think there are like groups working on that kind of thing. I'm trying to remember the name out of DC. There's a policy group and they're trying to make water consumer data more available, more translated. There's also, Ed, you mentioned Mouton Miguel, I think you said.
It's Laguna Niguel water. Yeah.
They're great. They have a data initiative as well for California, the California Data Initiative, I think it is. And they work with Netflix to like really assess how to get information out. So a lot of people are working on it.
I mean, until people feel the pain of the faucet or the dirty water coming out, it just, how do you motivate? Out east in Atlanta, it's $23 a kgal for water sewer combined, but that's mostly because the infrastructure's falling apart. That's what's motivating that. And California is a little more political. LA, I'm trying to do projects down there. I did a presentation on stage for BOMA, and the building owners of the skyscrapers were like, you know what, Eddie Brady's right. We can't put these 1-gallon toilets in our skyscrapers. Everybody's pushing 0.35 without knowing what they're talking about, right? It's very frustrating.
Rick made that point of ignorance before, and to Gigi's point, you have to make it stick too. I like to use the example of Cape Town, where they had that huge drought. Nobody even remembers because now the water's there. So there was a great push from residents and they saved water. They made it last longer. It was the community that did it. And then I don't think anybody thinks about it anymore.
Okay, I promise this is the last thing I'm gonna say, right? But the safe, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and it's been around forever. And I'm not picking on what's his name, the TV character that's our president still, but he like repealed and dialed and rolled back all that stuff. Did you know? You know that, right?
Yeah, that's very. I think we should all be talking about that.
I'm not saying, I voted for it, but I'm just saying, what the hell are you thinking, Sorry. That's it. I'm not talking anymore. Watch.
What else? What else do we want to talk about? What else is on people's minds?
I would like to ask a question. We only have about 2 minutes, but blockchain technology. I think I read one article about one approach to blockchain for water, where the water quality meter is at the home of the residents. And instead of the data going straight to the utility due to maybe some lack of trust, it goes to blockchain. And so that the end users get to see the data just as easily as the utility gets to see the data. And I'm wondering if that's something that other people have heard of, or if that's picking up anywhere. I think I read this article maybe 6 months ago, so I haven't really followed up.
No, I never heard of that.
I think there's the companies like Leak Alerter and IntelliSea that are at least trying to make it visible, but I don't know that the utilities are adopting that much. So maybe blockchain's a good example.
Well, it's due to the lack of trust sometimes, because if the utilities don't want to tell sometimes when they have water quality problems.
Sure.
And so this way it's open, it's shared, and everyone sees it at the same time. So
Cool.
Many challenges to address there, huh? It's a good example of different industries trying to solve the same problem.
Yeah, that duplicate effort thing,
yeah.
Was there anything we will mention back with the big group about, I guess, initiatives to address and increase awareness, or?
Just like I said again, with all this data, and I know there's so much of it, and it has to be, you talk about Power BI and some of the other dashboards and things that aggregate it for an executive summary or whatever. There's still this big cyber thing, and maybe I got freaked out by the audiobook I just listened to, which was amazing. These kids, and I lived in Afghanistan for a while, these kids are young, and in Pakistan, and we build the wall and they just hack through it, man. It's amazing what I saw them do. And maybe that data is not bad, but when you control industrial switches and controllers, so that's my concern. But
Ignorance is bliss, huh, Ed?
it is, yes, until you drink that water.
Hey, Tamara, maybe I could summarize a couple things of what I heard on this breakout session. So definitely the cybersecurity and the importance of it, and the really the importance it puts on vendors to be compliant and to be able to share that story. So that's number one. Number two is the innovation and emergence on what Amir brought up around data as a service. I think that's a key one. And then maybe third would be the hope that we have in the next generation coming up, and the importance and perspective that is being put towards sustainability, and the opportunity and really the responsibility that we all have in our roles to continue to develop and give back to that community. So those are the things that stood out to me.
James, I assume you'll kind of present that to the gang, or was that you, Rhett? I don't mind. I've got good notes on everything because it was a fascinating conversation. But please,
Yeah, go.
Rhett, you want me? Okay.
It's all you.
James has got it, or you've got it. I haven't.
33 seconds.
I think.
Great conversation, everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Learn so much.
Yeah, thanks for listening to me, guys. I talk a lot, sorry.
Great perspective, Edward. We appreciate it. So thank
All
you.
right, thank you, man. Thank you.
I've just closed my window, so I hope I can get back to the breakout room. I have no idea, or the other room.
Hey, where are you at, Tamara?
I'm actually in Austin.